Hi, I'm Dave Palmer. Thanks for joining me on this video as we talk about St. Thomas Aquinas and his teaching on what is truth and how can we come to know it. And St. Thomas's classic explanation of truth would be that truth is an agreement between the intellect and the thing. Okay, so he believed that there is a truth and we can come to know it, but how we do that is something that we're going to talk about in this video. And I want to compare St. Thomas Aquinas' teaching with a few of the other philosophers, one that came before him and also a couple of them that came after him as well. So we'll talk about that. Of course, nowadays, the very idea that there is a truth is called into question. We live in a very confusing age where some people would say your truth and my truth don't need to be the same thing. That's classic relativism, where, we can just be happy with the fact that our truths are different, but, that's okay. We'll walk away friends anyways. And Thomas, of course, would not agree with this. Okay, the intellect and the thing have to be in agreement. But what is the standard by which we come to know that something actually is true? Okay, so that's what we're going to talk about. Let's first of all talk about a few of the other philosophers and what they taught and some of the foundation for truth, and also how we got to where we are today, where it seems to be really difficult to even come to the idea of what truth is in the first place, right? I think when it comes to truth, nowadays, people have a few different ways of approaching it. First of all, some people may say, well, let's not bother talking about truth because we're not going to really come to know it anyways. Maybe there isn't any real definition of truth anyways, and your truth can be different from my truth. That's one way. Another way would be, I think probably a lot of people, Christian people, would say, we know there's a truth, but do we really need to explain it? Do we have to have any kind of philosophical grounding and explanation for it? We know there's a truth, but let's just leave it at that. I think the third way is the best, where we say there is a truth, and I think we need to explore what the truth is, and we do so by looking at philosophy and what a lot of the philosophers have said in the past, and most especially what St. Thomas Aquinas, as the doctor of the Catholic Church, and really the greatest Christian philosopher of all times, says about it. Okay, so let's first of all look at Plato, and this will be just kind of a basic teaching on Plato. I'm not a Plato expert, but in his teaching, he believed that the truth about things existed in this other realm, what he would call the universal, unchanging, eternal forms. And so the ideal dog would be in this realm, and the dogs that we experience down here below, the physical, actual dogs or cats or caterpillars or butterflies, only participated in that ideal dog or butterfly, which is in this other realm altogether, this eternal, unchanging forms of ideas. Okay, this is really what Plato's contribution was, and it was a very important contribution, but I think Plato missed it by saying that there's this other realm, whereas Thomas is going to come along and say, no, it's not in this other realm. The truth about things, the idea of things, first exists in the mind of God, and our intellect has to conform to the divine idea of the things that we experience. Okay, so that was Plato's contribution. And then the next one is Rene Descartes. He's considered the father of modern philosophy. He had his famous I think, therefore I am. And the problem with this is this is classic rationalism, where you're really only talking about the mind, the reason, coming to know something apart from the body, the senses. Okay, so, can we know that we exist? Can we know things just through reason without the use of the senses and our experience of the world? Okay, this is where I think, it's a very provocative quote. I think, therefore I am. But it's very problematic because it's not really taking the entire person into consideration, both the reason, but also that which informs the reason, which is our sense experience, what our body or our senses contributes to the process of coming to know things and ultimately coming to know the truth. Okay, so that was the problem with Descartes. Now, the next one is Immanuel Kant. Now, Kant, if anybody's ever studied him, and I haven't studied him a lot, but he came along with what was called the Copernican revolution in philosophy, where instead of coming to have an agreement between the intellect and the thing and coming to know the truth about things, he thought that our intellect actually imposed the truth on the thing. So in Kant's worldview, and again, this is a very simplistic, basic explanation of it, the knowledge of things really begins with us, and we impose the truth on things basically through our own intellect. Okay, now clearly this is problematic because it really kind of substitutes God as being the one who all things and the truth of things pre-exists in God's mind. In Kant's view, it really kind of turns it upside down, and it really begins with us. Okay, so clearly this is problematic. Well, let's take a look at St. Thomas Aquinas, of course, the philosopher who this whole page is attributed to. And St. Thomas Aquinas, interestingly, talks about truth very early on in the Summa Theologica. The very first question of the Summa is on sacred doctrine, and then the second question of the Summa has to do with, does God exist? And so Thomas, from the very, very beginning, wants to talk about God, okay, before he gets into angels, before he gets into human nature or all the other things that he's going to talk about throughout the Summa. He wants, first of all, to establish that God exists, and also, what is God? He gets into the attributes of God, that God is simple, God's perfect, God's good, God's infinite, he's immutable, he's eternal, he's one, and he's infinite. And right after he lists and explains all the attributes of God, the very next question, which is going to be question number 15, is on ideas. Okay, so he starts right after, what is God? What are his attributes? He wants to know what are ideas. Okay, now the ideas are going to pre-exist in the mind of God, not in this realm of eternal forms like Plato talks about, but the ideas are in the mind of God. So right after ideas, question number 16 is basically, what is truth? And so Thomas wants to get this not out of the way, but he wants to explain truth right away. And interesting, question number 17 is about falsity. How do we know what is false? So in question number 16 of the Summa, this is where Thomas asks about truth. He says, is truth in things or in the intellect? Okay, do we find truth in things, or do we find the truth of things in the intellect? Now, he says truth is in the intellect, but it's not in the way that Kant is going to later explain with this Copernican revolution of philosophy, where we impose the truth on things. That is not what Thomas is going to say. He compares the intellect to the will, and he says the will is drawn to the good. So if we see something that's good, like say a hot fudge sundae or a pizza or anything that we're attracted to, he said the goodness of that thing exists in the thing, but the truth about it, the truth of the thing, exists in the intellect. All right, but in a very different way from Kant. Again, the intellect tends to the true, which resides in the intellect. Okay, he goes on to say knowledge is according to the thing known being in the knower. Now, if you know about Thomistic epistemology or the theory of knowledge, he's going to believe in this passive intellect where we have the capability of knowing all things passively, but then we have to go out and we have to experience them with our senses. The senses will inform the intellect, and that's how we can, kind of ignite the knowledge of things through our sense experience, informing the intellect. Okay, this is where he differs from Descartes. It's not just I think, therefore I am. It's that we sense things, and through our sense experience, we come to know them, okay? The intellect conforms to the object understood. Now, this is the key. It conforms. That means there's some other standard by which the truth of things is ultimately based on. the aspect of the truth passes from the intellect to the object understood, based on the intellect on which it depends, okay? Based on the intellect on which it depends. The intellect on which it depends is God, because the idea and the truth of all things is first in God, and then our intellect has to conform to the ideas that originally in God, okay? So not in this realm of ideas like Plato said, but in the mind of God. Now, he gives an example in the Summa about the house is true as it is in the likeness of the architect's mind. So the architect, in a very clear example that we can all think of and understand, designs a house. Okay, so the design of the house is in the mind of the intellect of the architect. Okay, and then we have the result being the house. The truth of this house is going to be in the mind of the person who designed it. In this case, it's the architect. Okay, so if I think that this isn't a house, but rather it's a refrigerator or a bridge or a banana, that's not true, because it was designed by the architect, and the truth of this house resides in the one who created it in the first place and came up with the blueprint, right? So Thomas says perfection of the intellect is truth as known composing and dividing. This has to do with the way we come to know things, as I've already explained, through sense experience informing the intellect. Truth is found in the intellect as it apprehends a thing as it is. As it is has to conform to the reality of the architect and the great architect. In the case of the natural world, the things that we experience like trees and dogs and birds and butterflies and daffodils is originally in the mind of God. Truth conforms to the divine intellect, and the thing understood, truth conforms to the divine intellect. Okay, that's the key. Okay, so we have to know God, we have to know who he is, we have to know that all ideas exist in the mind of God. And so I have here, what is the solution to the problem we face today about truth? Because if truth is relative, as many people say, and your truth is different from my truth, we have to first of all get to know God. We have to converse with God. We have to pray to God. We have to ask God to help us with gifts like knowledge and understanding and wisdom, which are three of the intellectual virtues, right? And we have to have a certain degree of humility in understanding that, unlike what Kant said, we don't impose the truth on the world, but rather we conform our intellect and our truth to the reality of the thing which exists originally in the mind of God. And I have the Summa up here because we have to study. Okay, we have to inform our intellect and study, first of all, who is God, what is God, that God is all-knowing, God is all-powerful, and that the truth of all these things first exists in God. And so it's very practical. If you see something and you want to conform your intellect to the truth of all the things that we see in the world, we have to know God and how these things, first of all, exist in him. Okay, so hopefully this makes sense. This is a brief explanation of how Plato was close, but I don't think he put it in the mind of God. He put it in this outside realm. Descartes certainly was problematic. Kant was problematic. And because of these errant philosophers, we have a lot of confusion today because, for the most part, we are not humbling ourselves and realizing that if we want to know the truth of things, we have to, first of all, know God and know that all of this truth, first of all, exists in him, and that's how we conform our intellect to the divine intellect in regard to the things that we experience in the world. I hope this makes sense. I'd love to hear your comments and your thoughts on this, and thank you again for watching this video. God bless you.